Asia excludes Alaska and Hawaii.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Simone Biles looks like she's ready for the Paris Olympics in 2024 right now. The African-American gymnastics superstar won the U.S. Nationals all-around competition Sunday in San Jose. At age 26, Biles is the oldest woman to win the U.S. Nationals. The four-time Olympic gold medalist is making a comeback after taking 3 years off since the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. The Dodgers capped a 4-2 road trip with a win at Boston Sunday. Congratulations to the Little Leaguers from El Segundo. They beat Curacao for the Little League World Series championship. Louis Lappy hit a walk-off homer in the bottom of the sixth to win it for El Segundo. First Little League title for a team from L.A. County since a team from Long Beach won it in 1993. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Those are the sounds of Mahalia Jackson at the March on Washington 60 years ago today. Our entire program today, all 3 hours, dedicated to commemorating, celebrating this demonstration for freedom and justice, the greatest the country had ever known. Again, 60 years ago today on the National Mall. Women, the patriarchy was so real, so rich back then, that women did not get a chance to speak at the March on Washington, even though Dr. Dorothy Height was one of the big six who helped to organize the March on Washington. Dr. Height can be seen in many photos on the stage. I had a chance to befriend Dr. Height in her lifetime, and we had many conversations about this. So there she is in all the photos, but she doesn't get to speak, even though she's one of the big six organizing that march. Mahalia Jackson, though, because of her amazing gift of artistry, was allowed to get to the podium and to the microphone and to sing, and as she always did, she turned that place out. Mahalia Jackson did on that day. And as you heard us saying in conversation with both William Barber earlier today and Cornel West, we owe Mahalia Jackson a debt of gratitude, because as King was in his speech, if you listen to that I Have a Dream speech and listen to it in parts, as I've done more times than I can count, and I've written a book about it, of course, written a book that includes a chapter about that particular speech. He starts out high, he dips a little bit, and Mahalia Jackson, who had already performed, is on the stage seated behind Dr. King as he's speaking. And if you listen to the tape very, very carefully, you can hear her faintly say on the tape, "Tell him about the dream, Martin, tell him about the dream." And because of the advice of Mahalia Jackson, Dr. King put his prepared remarks in his pocket and started riffing on I Have a Dream, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Mahalia could feel that he needed to pick it up a little bit and shift gears. And so he did. And as I say, the rest becomes history. As a matter of fact, the speech was going to be called Normalcy Never Again. That was King's working title for his speech that day, Normalcy never again. It becomes known as the I Have a Dream speech, courtesy of Mahalia Jackson, who, again, knew what the Spirit felt like. And when the Spirit moved, she knew how to respond to it. And she felt that Spirit and yelled out to Martin, "Tell him about the dream. Martin, tell him about the dream." She heard it before, and he took off. And as I said earlier, the rest, as they say, is history. I mentioned Cornel West a moment ago. In case you've just tuned in, you missed a great hour of a dialogue with Dr. Cornel West. Check out the podcast later today if you missed that conversation. Well, we recorded that conversation this weekend in Mississippi as we celebrated the Emmett Till anniversary weekend, and I'd be remiss if I did not say a big thank you to Jackson State. I called JSU and said, "I'm headed to Mississippi. I need to use your studio to record a conversation with Dr. West." They opened the doors to their studio, a brilliant, beautiful facility on the campus of Jackson State. So we shout out that HBCU for allowing us to use their studios at Jackson State to record that conversation with Dr. West. We're in our third and final hour today, celebrating 60 years since the March on Washington. 2 hours, two conversations rather, in this hour. On the B side of this hour, as a teenager, Clay Carson actually attended the March on Washington. He could never have imagined then that decades later, Coretta Scott King would choose him as the scholar to oversee the King Papers project. So we'll be joined by Stanford's Clayborne Carson on the back side of this hour. We commenced this hour with Dr. Gretchen Sorin on the uncelebrated contributions of the black women who helped to shape this historic gathering 6 decades ago. I wish it were 6 years. 6 decades ago. Dr. Sorin, good to have you on the program. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
If I complained, I'd be an ingrate. I'm delighted to be alive and to be here, and more excited to be in dialogue with you. Let me just get a brief answer.
It's good to be back with you.
It's good to have you back. Let me get a brief answer to this first question, and then we'll jump forward and spend some time in deeper reflection. But when you think about the patriarchy that was so alive and well then, in some ways, it's to be expected that women didn't get the respect they deserved to be at the podium that day. But how do you read that, again, 60 years later?
You know, we were in a different time, and the expectations of women were different, and the expectations of men were very different. And I think it mobilized the women, and that was something that was really positive. It mobilized the women who were involved in the planning of this march to really say, you know, gender's important too. And we've really got to think about gender and get the men to think about gender as well as race.
When you say mobilize the women, you mean by that exactly what?
At the end of the march, Pauli Murray and Dorothy Height decided that they were going to have a meeting, and they called it After the March What? And at that meeting, they decided that it was really important to think about how are we going to make gender an issue as well as race. Women had always said, you know, we will stand up for our race and we will support our menfolk. But at the end of that march, after women were, I would say, pretty poorly treated, they decided that they would get involved in a female movement. And, you know, many of the women, like Pauli Murray, got involved in NOW, the National Organization for Women.
Sure. Yeah. Sexism almost sidelined black women at this march. You're hearing Dr. Gretchen Sorin talk about how they were mobilized beyond that march and how they fought back. A great deal more about that. We ain't leaving the sisters out today as we celebrate the March on Washington 60 years later on Tavis Smiley.
Seeking the truth, speaking the truth. This is the Tavis Smiley Show.
Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfected like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shawty don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly, we're hustling. Bustin', truckin'. Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit catblack.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450-mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and/or analytical projection. Consistent with the CHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
we go a little something like this.
Hey, it is me, D.L. Hughley, and I am thrilled to be heard weekdays in my hometown on KBLA Talk 1580. So check out the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580. We got a whole lot to talk about, let me tell you.
That's for the real.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar,
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
The Los Angeles Urban League helps African American and others in underserved communities achieve true social parity, economic self-reliance, and civil rights. For over 100 years, Los Angeles Urban League has ensured our communities have access to careers with living wages, opportunities to start and grow businesses, and clear pathways to personal and professional growth. Programs like BizCamp, Construction Career Academy, Bob Business Ready, and B-Warp. The Black Wealth Attainment and Retention Program are examples of the ongoing events designed to make our centennial mission to rebuild Black Wall Street right here in LA a reality. To sign up for our newsletter or to support the Los Angeles Urban League with your time, talent, and donations, visit laul.org. That's laul.org. The Los Angeles Urban League is a proud sponsor of Urban Family Focus Saturdays at 7 a.m. on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcasts of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Got your black. Follow the leader. Following the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Let's get back to more of this rich dialogue with Tavis Smiley.
I'm Tavis Smiley. Our guest is Dr. Gretchen Sorin as we continue our conversation about the 60th anniversary. 6 decades since the March on Washington. She's a distinguished professor and director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program at the State University of New York, and I'm pleased to have her on in this hour as we talk about the role that black women played in this iconic gathering 60 years ago. Let me start with this, Dr. Sorin, if I can. How did the uncelebrated contributions of women shape the very essence of this historic event? And we'll talk more about this meeting afterwards and the mobilization that went forward. But how did their involvement, their brain power, their presence shape this day 60 years ago today?
I think one of the things that is most amazing about the March on Washington is that sea of humanity. When you look out over the crowd and you see all of those people, and it was women who mobilized all of those crowds. It was across the country. It was church groups. It was the National Council of Negro Women. It was the Colored Women's Clubs. It was the National Council of Churches. And these were all efforts that were led by women to get people to the march. And then women were coordinating the transportation. So in order to get people to march, right, you had to have trains and buses and planes and flights. So getting all those people there, getting that sea of humanity that we look at today and say, wow, that was really an incredible scene. That was all done by women, and yet that was not really recognized. And you talked about the Big Six. Mm-hmm. You know, at the end, there's that iconic photograph in the White House of Roy Wilkins and A. Philip Randolph and James Farmer and John Lewis and Martin Luther King standing with the president. There's not a woman among them. Yeah. There's not a single woman. And those women that did all of that work were not recognized, except with a very brief, very small tribute to black women that was a part of the event, and that was very, very, very brief. In fact, it was less than less than 200 words.
Mm-hmm. How do you think? What's your read on how Dorothy Height endured that? As I said earlier, I got to know her in her lifetime, and as I look back on my life, I am so grateful for all the people that I've had a chance to interview repeatedly, and who I regarded as friends and hung out with and had dinners with, and they were at my house, I'm at their house, and so Dr. Height and I were friends. We've had many conversations about this, but as you look back on it, just what you just detailed for us about the photo that we know well, those of us who study this kind of history. They wouldn't let her in the photo even. Like, as a black woman who did all the work with other black women to get these crowds turned out, to get no recognition, that's a bitter pill to swallow, is it not?
Well, and I'm so jealous that you knew her, because I think she was an incredible woman, and so few people in this country know her. They know Rosa Parks, but they don't know the incredible president of the National Council of Negro Women. And you know, she said something on that day. She said they were after the march. She said something about, it was something like, they were happy to include women in the human family, but there was no question about who headed that family, and that was the men. And she had such an incredible impact on the civil rights movement, in organizing, in bringing women together and getting women involved, and then had no role basically at the March on Washington, because the men basically wouldn't let her in. Yeah. And as I said, it was a different time. It was attitudes about women were different. I think just putting Myrlie Evers in the program as Mrs. Medgar Evers tells you something.
Yeah. Tell me more about the meeting and the mobilization after the march that you referenced earlier.
Well, there was a lot of anger among the women, because they had met with the Big Six. They had met with the men, and they had tried to get in at least one woman speaker, and the speakers were very, very brief. Ruby Dee was briefly allowed to speak. Lena Horne said one word into the microphone, freedom, and that was it. So they were ignored. They were absolutely ignored, and it was in a really upsetting a missed opportunity for women. I would say the role that women played that was most visible at the march was the music. And I'm sure Clay Carson is going to talk about that, because he talks about the music as the glue of the movement, that not only was the glue of the movement, but was the glue of the event. Yeah. How do you hold this event together with all these people from all these different parts of the country and different worlds? But I think one of the things that really upset the women was that the young folks, the kids, John Lewis was a teenager. They basically threatened the older civil rights leaders and said, if you do not allow us to speak, if you do not allow us to have a voice, we're going to march. Yep. We're going to demonstrate. We're going to make trouble. And so they allowed John Lewis to speak, although they were terrified of his speech. Yes, they were terrified.
They let him speak, but they were scared of his speech. That is true, and
edited it.
They did. I was about to say that they edited his speech. I mean, he still got his. We played a bit of it earlier in today's program. You weren't here, obviously. We played a bit of it earlier. John Lewis's speech. He still got his dig into the Kennedy administration. He got a couple of digs in. But I shouldn't say digs. They're not digs. He told the truth. They weren't just digs.
He told the truth.
He told the truth. He got a couple of shots in. But it leads me to ask, given what you just laid out, and many of us know that story well, that they did in fact threaten to protest and march against the march if they were not allowed to speak. And John Lewis was their designated spokesperson. Why did the women not do the same thing, you think?
I think the women had always felt that they needed to support men, that black men had been emasculated by whites in this country, and black women wanted to show we support our men. We're there behind them, and they didn't want to have that as a public. They didn't want to have a public fight over this. Yeah. They wanted to be supportive of black men, and I think that's the way it's always been. And I think a lot of women didn't realize how gendered the problem really was. Right. You know, they didn't realize that. And, you know, this in some ways goes back to the 19th century. And the same thing happens with white women. When white women are trying to get the vote, the white men are saying, well, just wait, take your time. When black women are trying to get the vote in the 19th century, Frederick Douglass is saying, well, it's our turn now, meaning black men. It's our turn now. You have to wait. So I don't think this is anything new.
Yeah.
I think it's historically the same, exactly the same.
Yeah. So how do you read then, in retrospect, that Mahalia Jackson got more time at the mic than anybody else? I love Mahalia Jackson. More importantly, my mother, listening right now, loves Mahalia Jackson. I take nothing away from her artistry and her gift. But in retrospect, how do you read that a sister singing song got the most time on the mic?
Isn't it sad?
Yeah, well.
But it not only was it Mahalia Jackson, but it was Marian Anderson,
Sure.
and it was Joan Baez and Odetta. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
if you add up all the time that women had, it was all music.
Mm-hmm.
It was all the music. The even Jessie choir.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're saying is there was a view that there was a specific role that women played, and a public role. It was also that the men didn't want to be upstaged.
Mm-hmm.
As important as they were, but they did not want to be upstaged by any of these women.
So Dr. Cornel West was our guest in the last hour, and we were in Mississippi this weekend together for the annual Emmett Till anniversary weekend there. So he and I sat for a conversation that I recorded in Mississippi that we just played in the hour prior to this. And this was not a part of our conversation on air, but he and I had a conversation in the car. We were driving around in Mississippi. We were talking about Dr. King, who's a hero of both of ours. I regard Dr. King as the greatest American this country's ever produced. That's my assessment. He's our greatest American that we've produced, and we could debate that. But the point is, we were talking about Dr. King this weekend, and somehow we got into this conversation about what indictment we would have of Dr. King. We love this brother so. 60 years after the March on Washington, what would our indictment be of his life? And he and I together came up with 3 things about which we would indict Dr. King, as much as we love him, were he here in this studio right now. And one of those 3 things is that King knew full well that there was a bullet with his name on it. He knew that the death threats were increasing. Mm-hmm. He knew it was just, he told others, he knew he was not going to live a long life. He talks about it the night before, as we all know, in the mountaintop speech. He's killed the very next day. So he knew there was a bullet, again, chasing him with his name on it, and yet he didn't leave anything behind for his family, for Coretta and those babies. Now, it's one thing if you drop dead, as we said, Dr. West and I, in this car this weekend in Mississippi. It's one thing if you drop dead, Dr. Sorin. It's another thing if you know you're going to die and you ain't got no life insurance policy. All the money you're raising for the movement is a beautiful thing. All the money you got for the Nobel Peace Prize speech, the Nobel Peace Prize honor, big check for that, wonderful thing. But he didn't put anything away for his family. So we indict him lovingly on that issue. I raise that because it speaks again to the patriarchy of that time. Here's a guy who knows he's going to die at some point and doesn't tuck anything away for Coretta and his children. Now, they have the IP rights, intellectual property rights to all his stuff, but he didn't leave anything away for them. I raise that to ask, in retrospect, never mind the fact, and I get it, it was a different day. But how do we indict all of those men that none of them fought for a single woman to get up and give a major speech that day? How do we indict the men in 2023?
We are all, whether we like it or not, we are all subjects of our culture.
Yes.
And they, too, were subjects of this culture and the way the culture was structured. And it was definitely a male-dominated culture. And they were men. And that's
about it, huh?
The sexism, which, I mean, it really sidelined black women. And that... it's part of our culture. It's part of American culture. It's not just, we're not saying this is black culture. We're saying this is part of American culture, and they were part of that.
Yeah. How then do you read the progress or lack thereof? I'll take it either way. The progress or lack thereof of black women since this march in 1963.
I think it was the very beginning of black women standing up and saying we're not going to take this anymore, and that gender must be an issue that we discuss with our men and with other women, with white women, with all women, that we have to stand up and make sure that our gender is not misrepresented. Now, I always say, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, because I'm not sure exactly where we are after Obama. You know, in the post-Obama years, there's been kind of a back step or two in this country, generally, where women are concerned, but not just where women are concerned, where black people are concerned. I mean, look at what happened over the weekend.
Sure.
So, one step forward, and I think President Obama talks about the arc of the moral universe, which is a 19th century phrase. The arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. Well, I say it only bends toward justice if we bend it.
Oh, I say that all
you
the
have
time.
to bend it.
You are simpatico with me. I say that all the time, and it's funny you should say that, because one of the 3 indictments, I didn't want to get into it, I didn't have time, but one of the 3 indictments we had of Dr. King, Dr. West and I were talking about, was that very line. I mean, so much of everything King said was brilliant. I mean, so much, his stuff wasn't just poetic. It was prose, right? He was so beautiful in the way he phrased everything. But that's one line we'd want to talk to him about. We said that in the car. So here you come now, unbeknownst to you, raising that issue. We would say to Dr. King, who said that all the time, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Dr. King, no, it does not. It doesn't bend toward justice. You got to bend it, man. You got to make that thing bend toward justice.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I think what that says to all of us is that we must continue to be activists. We can't sit on our laurels and say, well, you know, the work is over. The work is not over. We have to do the work.
Yeah.
We have to do the work now.
Yeah. So speaking of doing the work, I got about 90 seconds here, maybe 2 minutes. Tell me how you respond to this. And you sort of teed this up. I want to just put a finer point on it. So you have women who are denied, essentially, even though they were at the epicenter of creating that march and making it happen. They're denied a chance to be heard, really. Fast forward to 2023, to your point, now you got women's reproductive rights under attack. We discussed on this program the other day the work of Ed Blum trying to stop black women from getting loans for small businesses because he's attacking diversity on a variety of other fronts, as he did affirmative action at the U.S. Supreme Court level. So to your point, in many ways, the lives of black women and their freedoms are under attack all over again 60 years later. How are we to read that in this so-called democracy?
How do we read anything in the so-called democracy? Our democracy is moving in a very frightening way, in a very frightening direction, I think, right now. And we're not moving toward democracy; we're moving toward fascism. I know that sounds harsh, but it
I'm laughing. You know, it doesn't sound harsh. I'm laughing again. The audience knows we just had a spirited conversation with Cornel West about fascism. Here you come in the final hour, and you're raising that word again. And the truth of the matter is that people have to have the courage to call it what it is. Do they not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We have to call it what it is. And you're right. Reproductive rights are under attack. Voting rights are under under attack. Something that we thought was settled.
That's right.
We thought that was settled, and now there are moves to prevent people from voting, to prevent young people from voting, and to prevent black people from voting. And it's these are frightening times we live in.
Yeah. Here's to black women. Here's to black women. There is no march on Washington 60 years ago today if black women are not at the epicenter of making it happen. And we didn't want to have this celebration day without referencing and making that point loudly and strongly, as Dr. Gretchen Sorin has done, distinguished professor and director of the Cooperstown Graduate Program at the State University of New York. Dr. Sorin, good to have you on. All the best to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Our final conversation on this day of celebration, 60 years later, with Clayborne Carson. We call him Clay Carson. When we come forward on Tavis, Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
Can you dig it? Come on! Escalade IQ. This the intro to the all-electric Cadillac perfection like Zoom. And on a full charge, you get 450 miles without the stop. Haiku. This is what I do. Daddy fat intellect since 92. Linked all the way back, panoramic roof. Come with 24-inch rim standard. Ooh, why? Shawty don't kill him. Cadillac diamond in the back, cold chillin'. And when I'm on attack, on the track is no ceiling. Sky's the limit. You hear me? You hear me? Straight drop, no parachutes. Lay lines like a longitude and latitude. Feel it, beloved, clearly, we're hustling. Bussin', truckin'. Cadillac.
For more on the Escalade IQ, visit catblack.com.
Available late 2024. GM estimate 450 mile range. On a full charge based on development testing and or analytical projection. Consistent with the CHA 1634 revision 2017 MCT. Range subject to change prior to production. Annual rates may vary based on service factors, including ambience temperature, terrain, battery age, and condition loading, and how you use and maintain your vehicle.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The death toll after the wildfire in Lahaina remains at 115. 3 more victims' names were publicly released on Sunday. They include a 28-year-old father of 2. 43 victims have now been identified publicly. The death count has remained at 115 for nearly a week, but hundreds of people remain missing or unaccounted for. Just one of former President Donald Trump's 18 co-defendants in the Georgia election interference case is being jailed. African-American Harrison Floyd was denied bond Friday after being considered a flight risk. Floyd is charged with racketeering, conspiracy, and influencing a witness. He turned himself in Thursday before Trump, but did not have a lawyer reach a bond agreement before he surrendered. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
In the Mid-City area, a stalled vehicle now on the 10 eastbound before La Brea Avenue, taking out the left lane with delays coming off La Cienega Boulevard. Willowbrook, we've got an accident with a vehicle fire, 105 east at Central Avenue. The fire has been put out, but everything blocking the right lane there. Downtown LA, working on a wreck 110 north at 3rd, 4th Street. That's in a middle lane with delays coming away from the 10.
Labor Day savings start now at Lowe's. Save on select 3-quart mums. Right now, just 2 for $12. Lowe's knows savings. Lowe's knows home improvement. Valid through 8/30 in-store only. Actual plant size and selection varies by location. Excludes Alaska and Hawaii. Discover credit cards do something pretty awesome. At the end of your first year, they automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right, everything you earned doubled. The cash back from trips, restaurants, all doubled. Seriously, though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
I'm a bad man. Simone Biles looks like she's ready for the Paris Olympics in 2024 right now. The African-American gymnastics superstar won the U.S. Nationals all-around competition Sunday in San Jose. At age 26, Biles is the oldest woman to win the U.S. Nationals. The 4-time Olympic gold medalist is making a comeback after taking 3 years off since the Tokyo Olympics in 2021. The Dodgers capped a 4-2 road trip with a win at Boston Sunday. Congratulations to the Little Leaguers from El Segundo. They beat Curacao for the Little League World Series championship. Louis Lappy hit a walk-off homer in the bottom of the 6th to win it for El Segundo. First Little League title for a team from L.A. County since a team from Long Beach won it in 1993. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Carson, you back! Hey, I am Jasmine Carson, LSU Women's Basketball National Champion. I had to up my game, and this time I upped my intimate grooming routine too. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area. Featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and a skincare regimen that is dermatologist tested, Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about the full regimen of products.
Support comes from Getty, presenting The Gospel at Colonus, a theatrical event under the stars that reimagines the story of Oedipus. Blending Greek myth with Black spiritual practice, the show follows the blinded Oedipus as he seeks redemption after a lifetime of tragedy. Co-produced by Court Theater, conceived and adapted by Lee Brewer, with music composed by Bob Telson. Thursdays through Saturdays this September at the Getty Villa Museum. Tickets available now at getty.edu.
Sounds different, huh? This is Tavis Smiley.
It is indeed, and I hope you've enjoyed our program today celebrating the March on Washington 60 years later. We've had some great conversations. In case you missed any part of today's program, as we always say, check out the podcast. They'll all be posted later today. We started today's program, a quick recap. The first half hour, we were talking to Dr. John D'Amelio about his book about Bayard Rustin. It's called Lost Prophet, The Life and Times of Bayard Rustin. You can't have a conversation about the March on Washington without talking about one of the pivotal organizers and unsung heroes. We spent the first half hour talking about Bayard Rustin. In the second half hour of the first hour, Dr. William J. Barber, who I regard as perhaps the greatest moral leader in our country today, who has picked up that mantle of leadership on the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. King had to lay down. Dr. Barber joined us in the first hour. Our second hour featured a conversation with Cornel West, our dear friend and brother, who has officially launched his presidential campaign for the nomination on the Green Party ticket. Cornel West was our guest in the second hour. We recorded that conversation in Mississippi this weekend, where he and I were together for the annual Emmett Till celebration weekend in the state of Mississippi. So we recorded that conversation at Jackson State this weekend and brought it to you today. We started this hour talking about women and why they were left out of this historic moment with Dr. Gretchen Sorin on the top half of this hour. And we closed today's show. We saved the best for last. Dr. Clayborne Carson. He was Clay Carson then. He was just a teenager. And he was at the March on Washington. He had no idea as a young person, who was actually turned on by Stokely more than MLK at the time. I'll let him tell his own story, but I know him so well, I know his story so well. He was there at the March on Washington as a kid, had no idea, could not have known that decades later, Coretta Scott King would tap him to be the scholar in charge of the King Papers Project. You never know how your life is going to turn. I am always perennially delighted to be in dialogue with our friend and brother, Dr. Clayborne Carson. Dr. Carson, how are you today, sir?
Pretty good. How are you, Tavis?
Man, if I complained, I'd be an ingrate. As I said, I'm always delighted. I can never have too many of these conversations with you. I'm always honored to be in dialogue with you. A few things I want to cover in the half hour that we have. Let me start with you telling the story once again. I know it well. I want the audience to hear it. How and why were you at the March on Washington 60 years ago today?
Well, I grew up in a small town in New Mexico, and Los Alamos, which was had actually a fence around it, and So going to the March on Washington was part of my getting out of that place where I had grown up and been so isolated and trying to figure out what was happening in the rest of the world. And, you know, I'd heard all this about the civil rights movement and went to a National Student Association meeting in Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective of New Mexico, Indianapolis was not that far from Washington, and I'd heard about these plans for the march. So I kind of hitched a ride with NAACP group from Indianapolis and got there, and it was an event that changed my life because I had never seen that many people. I guess there had never been that many people in a civil rights demonstration before, and it was people from all over the country, and not just the events on stage, but you know everything about it, the marching around and you could tell that certain people came there with the kind of Stokely Carmichael perspective of the real movement. You really want to join the movement, join us in Mississippi, join us in South Georgia, join us in Alabama, and all the places where the resistance is really tough.
Yeah.
And that was the message I got from Stokely Carmichael, who at that time I knew he was a student from Howard University.
Yeah.
And we were both students at this meeting trying to get them to, trying to get the student organization actually to say, we strongly support the march.
Yeah.
And we couldn't really get them to do that. It was amazing that some of the groups from Southern universities were just unwilling to vocalize their support for the march.
Yeah. Let me break in with some breaking news, Dr. Carson, for our L.A. audience. This program is syndicated, of course. We are grateful for that opportunity to be heard across the nation. But for those in Los Angeles, some breaking news in the case of Mark Ridley Thomas, longtime politician, at one point the most powerful black politician in the state of California, just now sentenced to 3.5 years 3.5 years in prison in this federal case. He will surrender on November the 14th. He's been denied to stay out while on appeal. We know he's going to appeal the case. The judge apparently has denied his remaining free during his appeal. Once again, he will surrender on November the 14th. He's been given 3.5 years in prison. We were talking about this earlier in the commercial breaks with my staff, asking me what I thought he might get. And this is about what I thought he was going to get. As you'll recall, again, talking to my LA audience, forgive me for just a moment, but if you don't know who Mark Ridley Thomas is, you should read about him. I mean, it's a national story in the sense that it's a continuing saga of African American politicians who the government has gone after time and time again. Dr. Carson and I will talk in a moment about how the government went after Dr. King prior to the march, after the march. They went after Dr. King. So when you are a certain kind of servant leader in this country and you are black, you should put on the whole armor, because at some point they are going to come for you. So once again, Mark Ridley Thomas, a longtime politician in the state of California, sentenced to 3.5 years of prison time, will surrender on November the 14th, which means that he will not be allowed to stay out while this case is on appeal. The probation department, to show you how they do black folk, the probation department in this case recommended an 18-month sentence. They recommended 18 months. The prosecution insisted and demanded on 6 years. How can the probation department, over $100,000 alleged crime, well, found guilty at this point, but we're talking about $100,000 here, of his own money, not even taxpayer money, $100,000 of his money, and the probation department wants you to serve 6 years. As I said days ago, the last officer in the case of George Floyd, his murder, the last officer was just sentenced a week or two ago. They gave him 5 years. I'm not talking about Derek Chauvin, but the Asian brother who stood around and did nothing. He got 5 years for that. And they wanted MRT, Mark Ridley Thomas, to serve 6 years for a crime involving $100,000 of his own money. And for that, the judge sort of split the difference, which I thought she might do. So it's not 6 years, it's not 18 months, 3.5 years. Once again, surrendering to start his sentence on November the 14th. He will not be allowed to stay out on appeal. So there's the breaking news for the LA audience and for those around the country who know Mark Ridley Thomas. Again, it's been a huge story even on the national front. There's the update on the Mark Ridley Thomas case. Stay tuned in Los Angeles to my hometown station, KBLA Talk 1580, to Areva Martin's show. She'll be covering this, I'm sure, in great detail. Tomorrow morning, Dominic DePrima's show, First Things First. So again, for KBLA listeners in Los Angeles, a great deal more to come throughout the day, tomorrow and the days ahead, about what this means, given that the sentencing of MRT is now official. When we come forward, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Carson, and as I said, get into some conversation about the way King, in fact, was targeted in his lifetime. I'm not comparing MRT to MLK. I'm just saying that when you're a black person and you love and serve people, there are moments where you have to be prepared for them to come for you. We're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington with Clay Carson on Tavis Smiley.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
You're listening to K-Trip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like watering your lawn during the hottest time of the day. and leaky faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Trip.
I'm David Goldberg, a bilingual elementary school teacher and president of the California Teachers Association. As we start a new school year, there's something new happening in California's public schools. They're called community schools, where families, students, educators, and communities are making decisions as one.
As a parent, I feel like we're really valued as partners in the education system.
Community schools are bridging the systems of academics with the community.
The curriculum is designed around the students and their academic needs.
I know community schools are working. We see it in parent involvement. We see it in student academics.
We saw double-digit gains in math, English, and reading scores.
It's a more innovative, holistic approach to educating students.
I really feel like this is the first time that we're really seeing a system change in our school.
It's innovative, fresh, and they're already working.
We invite you to learn more about community schools as we come together to reimagine public education here in California. And that's why CTA brought you this message.
Extreme heat can make you very sick and can be deadly. For Californians 65 and over, it's important to have a plan. Ask your healthcare provider if your medications affect your ability to cool down. Know the signs of heat illness and stroke, as well as the location of your nearest cooling center or air-conditioned space. And if you have loved ones over 65, be sure to check in on them on hot days. Learn how to stay safer from extreme heat at heatreadyca.com. Brought to you by the state of California.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Dr. Carson, we look back on Dr. King 60 years ago to this great speech. My view is, knowing his work better than most, not as good as you, my view is that that's not even his greatest speech, even though it's regarded that way. There are a lot of other things I'd put in competition with I Have a Dream, although he was amazing that day, 60 years ago, a day he killed it. I wonder if you'd say a word, though, about the way that King is just one of a long line of politicians who are attacked for their beliefs, and they locked Martin up and spied on him, did all kind of things to Dr. King. And so it's important, I think, as we look back on this day, to not just celebrate the speech, but to look at him in a 360 sort of way, and to see all that he had to endure beyond this great speech he gave 6 decades ago today.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind is that there was always this battle going on between the establishment, the politicians in power at that time, and the movement. Mm-hmm. You know, the March on Washington was not just a march; it was a march for jobs and freedom, mm-hmm. and it was mobilized by Bayard Rustin, who was always under FBI attack. A. Philip Randolph had tried to do a similar kind of march, not back in the 1940s. And of course, Martin Luther King, at the end of his life, what was his last campaign? It was a Poor People's Campaign to bring people to Washington, not just to march, but to stay there until something was done about the economics of American society. And so the Poor People's Campaign was his last campaign. And of course, he faced opposition from some people in his own organization. They said it was unlikely to result in what he was seeking. But that notion that economics and politics go together is something that still is something that many people don't want to recognize. Yeah. And that they're willing to look at the civil rights side of it, but the economics of it are just as important. Yeah. And they certainly were to the organizers of the march.
Yeah. Because you've studied him better than most and certainly longer than most, how would you situate this moment in his essentially short life of being our preeminent advocate? How would you situate this moment in that body of work?
For me, it was something that is part of the magic of the moment. You know, that first of all, he was the last speaker, mm-hmm. the last speaker on the program. And he was scheduled to give a speech of 5 to 7 minutes. And then at the last moment, Bayard Rustin said, if you need to take a little bit more time, you can do it. And if he hadn't gotten that encouragement to keep speaking, we wouldn't have I Have a Dream, because that was not part of the written speech. And he essentially became extemporaneous for the last 7 or so minutes of the speech. And yet today, most people remember that part of the speech far more than the first part of the speech that was written out. And I think that it really shows his talent. And for me, as a person coming to my first demonstration and hearing that, and of course meeting Stokely Carmichael, I stayed in touch with him until the end of his life. I was always more drawn to the SNCC side of the equation, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, people who were doing the projects in the Deep South and the Voting Rights Campaign. And I think in some ways we've got the pyramid backwards. We tend to give a lot of emphasis to civil rights legislation, not so much to voting, and not so much at all to economics. And I think it should be just the opposite.
No, I love the way you make that point about how we need to flip that pyramid. I receive it, I accept it, and every time you say it to me, it makes perfect sense. Our remaining moments as we celebrate 60 years since the March on Washington, with Dr. Clayborne Carson, who was there that day as just a kid, who knew that decades later he'd get a call from Coretta Scott King as a scholar, asking him to be the person in charge of the King Papers Project. We'll talk about that when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking. That's what we do around here. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What's up, party people? It's your favorite MC's favorite rapper, MC Light here. And we're celebrating 50 years of hip-hop, authentically powered by Cadillac. And we're going to take it way back to where it started. It was only fitting that hip-hop began with teenagers at a back-to-school jam in the rec room of a South Bronx apartment complex by an 18-year-old brother. By the way, I'm also sure he had a Cadillac parked outside. He noticed the energy on the dance floor when he switched between two turntables, extending the beats, repeating the breaks, and never losing the rhythms. And that was the birth of hip-hop. And from that moment, it took off.
For more on how Cadillac is celebrating hip-hop's 50th, visit Cadillac.com/audacity.
Boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black.
What make you? Yeah.
The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
Meet Joe A, Joe B, and Joe C.
What's up?
3 everyday Joes perfecting their banking with Chase. Joe A is locking his lost debit card with the Chase mobile app. Joe B is cruising toward his new ride with AutoSave. And Joe C's Chase banker is helping him budget to go back to school. Tools that help protect. Support for what's next. One bank that puts you in control. Visit chase.com/checking. Chase. Make more of what's yours.
Chase mobile app is available for select mobile devices. Messaging and data rates may apply. JP Morgan Chase Bank, N.A. member FDIC.
Who do you trust to get at the truth? Tavis Smiley. That's who. The conversation continues right now.
Dr. Carson, you've done such brilliant work as a scholar over the course of your career, ongoing, of course, at Stanford. I could have talked to you about biodiversity, given the book you've written about that. So many things I could have engaged you in dialogue about, but I didn't want to do this 3-hour program today without having your voice as a part of it, celebrating 60 years since the March on Washington, 6 decades ago today. August 28, 1963. But the part of your story that it just tickles me every time I think about it. And you know me, we've had so many private conversations and dinners. But just the juxtaposition of you being a kid at the March on Washington, just a kid, and decades later in your career, Coretta Scott King calls you and asks you to be in charge of the King Papers Project. For those who don't know the story, at first you demurred. You didn't want to do it. You kind of reminded me of Martin. He didn't want to be the leader of the bus boycott in Montgomery. At first you told Coretta Scott King no a couple times, but you finally came around and agreed to do it. But what do you, all these years later, how do you read at this point in your life those two things, those two dots, being at the march and then being asked by her decades later to be in charge of her husband's papers?
Well, it just shows that sometimes when I say maybe not, I really should be saying, yeah, I'm very proud to do it because I've learned so much, and my inclination was to initially to study SNCC and see the movement from the bottom up, but looking at the movement from Martin's perspective has been so enlightening to me, and it's just amazing in a sense that of all, I was a stranger at the march, and yet in this sense I've gotten to know hundreds of the people who were at the march, and interviewed many of them, and I think that to me is the most remarkable thing. Not just Coretta. But, she was an important individual because one of the things I found out about her is that she was an activist before she met Martin. And that has always, phenomenal person. And I'm really glad that we had those decades to work together and produce his papers.
I got 30 seconds here. I'll give it to you right quick. What, to your mind, is the enduring legacy of this iconic march 60 years ago today?
I think the legacy is that movements start out with individual action. And, when you look at something like Black Lives Matter, it's the same thing. You have discontented people, and as long as they're isolated, they're not very powerful. And then at some point, they begin to march. They begin to become a movement. And that whole process is something that is almost magical in the sense of turning private discontent into political action. And that's what we do today. And it's the same problem. There's a lot of discontented people, but they're not attaching themselves to a movement to actually change the world.
I say all the time. Nope, I hear you. I'm sorry. I say all the time, moment, momentum, movement. Starts with a moment. Somebody is discontented, as Dr. Carson said. That moment builds momentum. That momentum can, in fact, turn into a movement. He's retired now from the King Institute as its director at Stanford, but he continues his work as the leader of the World House Project, collaborating with other human rights advocates to realize King's vision of a global community in which all people can learn how to live with each other in peace. We love and respect Dr. Clayborne Carson. Doc, thanks for your voice. Good to have you on our program today. All the best to you, my friend.
Great to talk to you, Tavis.
Hope you enjoyed these 3 hours today, looking back, assessing where we are now, and answering that question, where do we go from here? More of Tavis Smiley tomorrow. Until then, keep the faith.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a Monday, of course, the start of a work week for many of us. Thank you for joining us. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Former President Trump will be arraigned in his Georgia election interference case next week. A Fulton County Superior Court judge scheduled